To all the amazing managers and leaders out there, we know what you're facing. Your role might be tough at times. We know it's tough at times, but it's also a chance to make a huge impact. So join us at the virtual water coolers. We discuss, strategize, and level up your leadership and management game. Well, howdy, folks, and hey there, Rose. Guess what? I don't really think we need to do a lot of chit chat about current events because there's a lot going on in the world right now.
Yeah, and I agree. And this isn't a political podcast, nor do we ever intend it to be. But it's really tough to not look at what's going on in the environment and see just an incredible opportunity to take away some amazing leadership lessons.
Yeah. And by environment, you mean just like society and the country.
Society, the country, the world. You can't get on any social platform or turn on the news or look at your watch on occasion and not see a leadership learning opportunity.
Yeah, no joke. And so with that, we're going to do a follow on to our Mr. Musk Goes to Twitter episode that was in season 1, because now we've got Mr. Musk Goes to Washington.
So did you ever think when we did Mr. Musk Goes to Twitter, we'd get to do a sequel, Dana?
No, I didn't. But here we are. So Rose, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Okay. So with the situation in Washington and the government agencies right now, a lot of the words that you're hearing describe it are chaotic, unintentional, not well planned. And we're going to go into those examples in a minute. But the chaos that you're seeing is, and the message that we want to get across today is it's not necessarily, in all cases, in some cases, but in all cases, it's not the what that's being done, but the how it's being addressed. Because if you take a general poll, you're always going to have the tails, but I think most people would support efficiency, less bloat in government. And again, it's not about that, but it's the way it's being done.
Yeah, totally. And so from my perspective, and this is just Dana Boss's perspective, I wish it wasn't a case study, but it is. We're seeing a case study in the impact of a certain approach to leadership and a leadership style and the choices that leaders make. Because leaders have to do tough stuff sometimes, like decide to reduce staff in certain organizations. But there are choices about how you go about that. And we're just seeing sort of the impact, the choices that, and I hate to say it, these two leaders are making, because it's Musk and it's Trump. I want to highlight that I worked in an organization where the COO who was incredibly influential. He was really internally running the organization. The CEO was totally external. And he had a very similar leadership style to Elon Musk. I wouldn't say it was as severe, but it was similar. It was chaotic. You kind of never knew what kind of mood he was going to be in and what end was up. It bred a ton of insecurity. People just didn't know where they stood. And I will say, you watched it just create subpar performance. And it's not that the organization I was in wasn't generating results. But it was so clearly not our best results, because people were fighting with each other. You get insecure and you can start fighting. In other words, a ton of mental energy was being spent just trying to react and survive in the company environment, rather than that energy being spent on delivering the best outcome for the customer.
And I'll just pile on that really quickly. From my experience, I think it's really very helpful in these types of environments to lay out what your plan is. So it's seen as well thought through, disciplined, calculated, and you take the ambiguity out of the concern. Not that if you're going to be the last person if you're going to lay out, I'm going to address these various organizations and your group's last, there's nothing on the planet that you're going to do to get rid of the anxiety of that group that knows they're going to be impacted. But at least you have some type of understanding to the time frame by which you may be impacted by these results. And then that allows you to make personal informed decisions about how you would like to respond. I would like to start looking for a job. I would like to wait it out. Or, hey, I've been working for 45 years. I'm excited and I want to take the opportunity to retire. So I just think communicating with a lot of intention and also being clear on what was used to make these decisions, what information, what rationale, what insight, what information was used to make these decisions. So let's get into specifics, Dana. Let's jump in. I think one of the things that's getting a lot of attention right now, and you see almost a daily news alert on whether it's the Department of Education or the Department of Homeland Security or any agency right now, is layoffs. In this case, the government is an analogy for any organization that you guys might be leading, large or small. And you always start by looking at the data of your organization. One of the things is your spending. And in the case of the US government, the debt has grown from 18 trillion in 2015 to over 35 trillion at the end of 2024. In business terms, we would call this, we have a bit of a spending problem. We look to see that we have an associated amount of incremental revenue in the form of taxes to offset the increase in spending. So you would go out and you would assess your data. So if you're sitting back, you're running the government right now, you'd go, you know what? We probably have an unbalanced P&L. Simply said, in our government.
There was a time when we had a balanced budget.
Yeah, and not so long ago.
Yeah, it was in 2001. Because some people are like, well, there's always debt. So let's just be clear that there was a time when we did have a balanced budget. And that's a whole other discussion. But anyway,
yeah, absolutely. We can get into how much debt is good debt, but we're not a finance podcast, we're a leadership podcast. So we'll get into that. So let's go back to leadership. But if you're sitting back running an organization, these types of scenarios, whether you're in the government or you're in a company, often lead to layoffs, which is what we're seeing all over the market right now. Like you're seeing it in corporate America, and now you're seeing it at the government level. And to be quite honest, I think a lot of government employees aren't used to this type of environment. So maybe if you're sitting in corporate America, you're like, heck, join the club. We deal with this pretty regularly. So this layoffs are a path to resolving some of the spending reductions. It's not the only way, but it is a path.
And, this is where, again, it's the how that needs to be proven here. You can say there's a rationale to reduce the number of employees in the US government. And you just laid out some data to that effect. So there have been a variety of approaches. I mean, one approach called voluntary separation, and that was that email that was sent out saying, all of you can choose to just leave. And I can't remember, Rose, there was a pretty decent package associated with it, meaning like you'd get X months paid.
Yeah, which is normal in corporate America. Yeah.
That's normal. Not actually. I mean, that's generous. There's plenty of layoffs that happen in corporate America where there is not 3 months of pay included. But it was clear. I don't think anyone saw it coming. So the management and leadership levels in these various agencies, hadn't been briefed on it. So it seems. And so it created a ton of churn in the organization because everybody was like, what is this? And obviously you're going to go to your manager, your leadership, and be like, what is this? What should we know? All the details associated with making a decision like that, I'm very confident can't be addressed in an email. It was done like just very abruptly without a lot of preparation within each agency. People didn't see it coming.
Yeah, I think, and commiserate with that, what the other effect that you're seeing is, and I'm going to kind of tail off of what you just said around preparation. It doesn't appear that they're operating off of much data and information that has been socialized, discussed, and proved to be accurate. You could look at the commentary around how many dead people were receiving Social Security when it turned out it was just a COBOL programming issue that they chose not to fix because they didn't want to spend the money to do it. You could look at the fact that there have been layoffs in major organizations where they were like, oh, shoot, there's a lot of
We
fear.
didn't mean to eliminate
We
that.
didn't mean to cut the air traffic controllers when we have a lot of plane crashes these days to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the population. So then they begin to hire that skill set back. So I think there's a number of examples where maybe they went in with the intent of looking at the data, but there wasn't enough socialization to the decisions and the outcome from that data to allow sound decisions to be made and committed to and not ultimately reversed, which creates chaos.
Yeah, so it's like preparation. I totally get Doge's desire for swift action.
Absolutely.
And
And it can
and
be done swiftly.
yeah, although not this swift, right? Like a month to have some discussions, to ask each agency, like, which do you consider critical personnel that will, imperil the safety of American citizens if cut? Like, just take a month. Just take a month to like
Yeah.
find that stuff out. And so there you go. I mean, and again, this is about the choices. And what I'm seeing is a leadership choice to not care about disruption. It's going to be disruptive no matter what to lose X percent of your staff.
Sure.
But it's just, this is literally, we don't care about disruption. We're just going to like sort of eliminate this, and that. It's to your point, Rose, you sometimes call it the chainsaw approach as
Yeah.
opposed to a scalpel.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, well, I mean, I remember in that cabinet meeting that Musk had that was recorded, he was sort of like, well, we're going to make mistakes. I mean, we realized we cut the Ebola team and we realized that's not a great idea. So we hired them back. And so he's utterly comfortable with that kind of chaos. And that's a choice people make. Like, I'm not going to worry about minimizing disruption. I'm just going to rip the band off. And then, as we realize that certain critical things got impacted, we'll fix it. High level, trust me, it doesn't serve any organization to approach it that way.
The one thing that I will say that he did comment on around we will make mistakes. Anytime you go through an action like this, you probably will make a mistake. I recall a situation where I received a spreadsheet that had 5,000 names on it. And myself and another person had to decide which people were staying at Intel and which were going to another company. The people that were leaving were not excited about leaving Intel at the time. This was quite a few years ago. And with that decision, when you're keeping your cone of silence very small and you're looking at that much data, you're going to make a mistake. And I to this day, and this is probably the difference between me and Elon Musk, to this day, the mistake that I make just haunts me. It haunts me. So you will. I don't want people to walk away thinking as you go through these types of complicated decisions as a leader, you won't make a mistake. You may. But having said that, you put as much time and effort and diligence into the decision that you can for the best outcome of the organization and the people impacted.
Yeah, and like in this case, the mission of the organization.
Yes.
Which might be keeping people
Yes.
safe during
Absolutely.
air travel or whatever.
So we're starting to kind of talk around the fringe of some of the issues that happen and the impacts of when you don't clearly communicate, when you don't use discipline and diligence, when you don't take the time to make sure that your decisions aren't having the unintended consequences. What does that do in terms of impact? Like one of the things that hits front and center to me is trust. So like immediately on the approach that Elon is taking, a lot of people, whether it be the people in the organization or part of the country, don't trust that what the government's intentions are. So you immediately break down trust. If you go back to the email example, that email was sent out without consideration of the current budget situation. It was sent out without training of the managers that had to answer questions.
This was the voluntary separation
Yes,
email,
the
right?
email on the voluntary separation. And what that ultimately is an impact on your brand. the brand of the person making the decision and the
Right.
brand that the organization that person represents. So
Mhm.
it has absolute brand impact. What are some of the other consequences you can think of, Dana?
Yeah, well, and just to that trust thing, by the way, some people said, "This actually is a really nice voluntary separation offer, X months of pay." I
Sure.
don't trust that they're gonna actually do it. I'm gonna say yes, and then they're gonna be like, "Oh, changed our mind. You're not gonna get any month's pay." So there was a lot of people who just didn't trust what it was saying. And then we've already talked about this, like, there's been rework, unnecessary rework. Critical skills were laid off, and then you've gotta put them back in. And some people will be like, big deal. No, it could very well be a big deal to take a 2-week break or a 1-month break from a critical program because everybody disappeared. So you're just seeing like that's a waste of hours to do all this rework and rehiring, and then everybody's got to get back up to speed and everybody's got to get coordinated again. And never mind like the emotional frustration of all that.
So it's what you wouldn't call efficient
Right. Hello.
to do it that
Hello.
way. It's not terribly efficient when you're using the chainsaw method because there is an inordinate amount of rework required often. And then I guess my last comment on some of the consequences is just the impact on people. We've talked
Yeah.
about trust, we talked about rework, but just like I know that Musk was on Rogan a couple weeks ago, and he
I was just a
actually
couple weeks ago.
yeah, recently, like it might have been last week. But he literally said there is a fundamental weakness of Western civilization in people demonstrating empathy. It's exploiting a bug. What do you think about that, Dana? When
Like,
someone says that empathy is a bug?
well, right. I mean, I haven't heard it, so I don't quite know what he meant. I mean, I absolutely hear what he's saying. I mean, he believes that empathy is a weakness. And maybe is he saying like it's a bug in like our like
Operating system.
our human operating system, like
Yeah.
empathy. Yeah. Well, I mean, all I can say is there again, this is choices. I mean, you can either choose to care about the dignity of people and respect them, even when you're doing things that negatively impact them, or not. I find that a very sad observation. Maybe other people wouldn't, but and for what it's worth, speaking of data, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a ton of data on at least in the workplace, the regular workplace, and this would include government agencies,
Right.
that empathy creates more engaged, productive employees. So
Yeah, to me, it says, I'm a robot. I only respect the intelligence of computers, and computers can make decisions, but I will tell you that only humans can feel. And
right.
we're not computers. So, regardless of the lens of empathy as a weakness, computers can't emote for a
Nope.
reason because it's an evolved emotion. And I find it to be infuriating and sad.
Totally. By the way, that's why generative AI is never going to be truly human because it's not traumatized by its childhood and dealing with all those emotions.
That's right. That's absolutely
So,
right.
all right, let's end this with some speed dating, so to
Oh,
speak.
we're speed dating.
Speed round.
Yeah.
So, Rose, I'm going to ask you about some like different actions that Doge has taken or this new
Sure.
administration has taken. And you just tell me like if you've had to deal with these or you've seen them before.
Oh, fun. Yes, let's do this. This sounds fun.
Okay, the firing of consultants.
Oh, yeah. I have to say, every time we were doing cost cutting, one of the first things you look at is your big ticket items or what you spend in cash, right? And the first thing what always pops up first is your consulting contracts. So we would frequently cut our consulting contracts when belt tightening came up.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that the choice makes sense. How you do it, like maybe the most efficient approach would be to just before we do that, let's think about the impacts of ending this and minimize the disruption, or at least be prepared to handle the disruption.
Sure. I can give you a perfect example. Some of them are multi-year commitments.
Right.
Right. So a multi-year commitment may come with a penalty for cancellation, right?
Uh-huh.
So if there's any penalty clauses, then you have to either be prepared to pay them
Mhm.
or you have to be prepared for continuing the contract. And you have to understand, if it was a staff augmentation type activity, how you're going to fill that void in your resource pool. So to your point, you have to, even though it seems, air quotes, fingers above my head, easy to make those types of cuts, there's a lot of due diligence that's required before they're done.
Yeah. And I think we haven't used this word, but everything we're talking about is just being intentional.
Yes.
As opposed to just looking at a printout and being like, delete that, and there's nothing to talk about. It's delete this, and this, and then let's like prepare the organization to handle it.
Yeah.
All right, Rose, have you seen sort of an organization saying, share 5 things you achieved this week?
Yeah, this is one of those, when I saw this request, I'm like, so? When I started at Intel in corporate America, we used to do weeklies. The thing that it allowed you to do was really gauge your, what was my impact this week? And did I do what I thought I wanted to get done? If I didn't, why? And what does that mean for what I have to get done next week to stay on track? So I didn't find that to be very inflammatory. The part I didn't like is what the ramifications were.
Well, but I also remember that practice, and you CC'd your team, and it was a communication mechanism as well. It was so that we all stayed on the same page with like who's handling what thing and where is it at. And so it is not an unreasonable ask at all. But again, the how sort of matters here. It's important to have some context for why it's being asked. And the way that Mr. Musk did it, I mean, did he even say in the email, like, and if you don't respond, you're fired?
Think so. We should double check that.
Yeah, we should double check that. But either way, given the current environment that people are functioning in, you see an email like that, and while of course it's a reasonable ask, you're like, well, is this some form of a way to figure out who gets fired next?
Well, and I didn't, I had a personal commitment to get the action done because I knew the importance to my manager and my team. And because we operated in a high degree of trust and we wanted to all be successful together, I had no issue ever writing my weekly because I thought it was a productive means by which to communicate. I wasn't fearing for my job if I didn't do it. Now, would my boss get on my ass if I didn't get my weekly in? Sure, because it was a commitment that I made. But I didn't worry that I was going to get fired if I didn't.
And you also weren't worried that you were going to get fired because of what was in it. You know what I mean? Like,
never.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if certain commitments you made didn't get done, somebody would talk to you about it. And so again, in an environment where there's a ton of insecurity and low trust, what feels like a reasonable, simple request becomes this massive source of insecurity and churn in the organization and just completely derails people.
Okay, so Dana, those were fun. Let's jump to our hot takes.
Yes. Choices. Leadership is all about choices, and we can clearly see the choices that are being made and the impacts of them. And we'll all have to do tough stuff as managers and leaders, and you've got to make your choices. I personally would not recommend these approaches. And again, this is all about the how. You have choices around the how.
Mine's going to be a little harsher, I think, this week. I actually think Elon's lack of emotion is robotic, concerning. I think it influences decision making, and I think it influences highly the impact on the people around him. Ultimately impacting brand, which we're seeing in the demise of Tesla stock down. It's probably 40% now. I think it was up to 50% yesterday, but it's down probably about 40%. So it impacts your brand. The how impacts your brand. It impacts your efficiency by having to do rework. And I think I think all the time, it's very important to slow down, to speed up.
Yeah. That's a great way to say it. And again, it's based on your choices come from your values, and you're either going to prioritize sort of respect and dignity for others, or you're not. And we're seeing the latter.
So I will close by saying the reason we do this podcast is to help people become leaders that are not like Elon Musk.
I would agree.
So with that, we will talk to you next time on Maestro Mindset.
Bye, y'all.